All right, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're going to shift our focus entirely away from Edward Rochester's carefully crafted version of his own past, and instead look squarely at his actual, calculated behavior in the present. If we really want to understand how he treats Jane Eyre, we have to strip away all that moody, romantic atmosphere of Thornfield Hall and look at the cold, hard facts of his actions. We are going to look at the con, the madwoman, and the very real crimes being committed right under our noses. Now look at this. Rochester openly admits his manipulation to Jane. He says, "I feigned courtship with Miss Ingram because I wished to render you as passionately in love with me as I was with you." Generations of readers have swooned over this line. But let's look closer. This is not a confession of love. It's actually a stunning admission of using jealousy as a deliberate weapon against Jane. So we have to completely reframe this so-called romance right out of the gate. Because honestly, treating the person you love like a pawn in a game, that is textbook psychological warfare. He isn't wooing her, he's systematically manipulating her emotional state just to break down her defenses. It's a highly calculated tactic to make her so desperate and so isolated that she literally has no choice but to fall into his arms. Okay, moving into section 1, the anatomy of a con job. Let's actually map this courtship out, not as some fateful sweeping romance, but honestly like a carefully executed heist. Step 1, he brings the beautiful, wealthy, aristocratic Blanche Ingram to Thornfield and parades her right in front of Jane, letting her watch them flirt. Step 2, he pretends he's about to marry Blanche and tells Jane he has to send her away to Ireland. Step 3, and this is wild, he actually invents a highly specific fake job for her, telling her she's going to be a governess for Mrs. Dionysius O'Gall's 5 daughters, completely convincing Jane that she is about to be utterly abandoned. And step 4, he waits until Jane is at the absolute peak of emotional despair, and only then does he reveal it was all a lie. He methodically pushes Jane to the absolute brink of pain, just so her immense relief will overwhelm her into declaring her love. And you know what? The manipulation works flawlessly. It extracts this incredibly famous, desperate declaration from Jane without her ever realizing she has been played. She cries out, "I am your equal, and we are equal." Now, it is a powerful, iconic moment of self-worth, but the heartbreaking context here is that this triumphant declaration is actually the direct, intended result of Rochester's emotional manipulation. Just imagine your intense relief after being pushed to the very edge of emotional devastation. That manufactured relief completely explains the tragedy of this relationship, because Jane never realizes she has been conned. Later in the story, she literally wanders the moors, freezing, starving, practically at death's door because of his actions, and she still does not blame him. She remains utterly devoted to her manipulator because the psychological warfare was just that effective. Which brings us to section 2, hiding the madwoman. Having exposed the emotional con, let's look at his physical crimes. The novel really demands that we accept Bertha was hidden away for 15 whole years. But come on, let's look at the facts. Bertha laughed, she howled, she cursed, she violently attacked people. Jane hears her strange laugh on her literally first day there. The housekeeper absolutely must have suspected something. Grace Poole was being paid enormous sums of hush money. The third-floor room remained mysteriously locked. To believe this secret was kept for a decade and a half demands we accept an impossible conspiracy of silence among all the servants and staff at Thornfield. This isn't a secret, it is a literal narrative miracle. And this impossible secret brings us face to face with the cold, hard, legal reality of 1840s England, showing us exactly how far Rochester strayed from the actual law of the land. 2 massive pieces of legislation hang over this story. First, the Bigamy Act was passed way back in 1604, and then in 1845, literally just 2 years before Jane Eyre was published in 1847, Britain passed the Lunacy Act. So that Lunacy Act, it was specifically designed to protect the mentally ill. It established central regulatory body oversight, mandated an examination by a doctor, and required official certification to confine anyone. Well, Rochester completely bypassed all of those strict legal requirements. He simply locked a woman in a room and labeled her a maniac, meaning he didn't just break moral laws here, he actively broke the criminal law of England. That takes us to section 3, the silent witnesses. All right, picture this, the interrupted wedding day. The attic door is finally opened and the truth comes out. Rochester brings three highly respectable men up to the attic, a priest, a lawyer, and Bertha's own brother. They all witness an illegal confinement firsthand. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. Wouldn't you call the authorities? Because incredibly, these three men do absolutely nothing. The priest gives a mild reproof. The lawyer checks if Jane is innocent and then dips. And the brother leaves with unconquerable eagerness. It is utterly baffling. Nobody files a complaint. Nobody calls the Lunacy Commission. The author essentially makes the law completely vanish, allowing a literal narrative miracle to protect Rochester from facing any legal consequences. The defense of "she's crazy" is magically used to just erase a severe felony. Which naturally leads us to Section 4, the crime of bigamy. We absolutely have to examine the ultimate crime here. If that wedding had actually gone through, Rochester would have been a felon. Under the Bigamy Act of 1604, marrying while a previous spouse was still alive carried massive penalties. We are talking about imprisonment, heavy financial fines, total social ruin, and even transportation to a penal colony. Rochester knew this. He knew that marrying Jane while Bertha lived was a severe, life-destroying felony. But what about Jane? Think about the reality of what he was actively doing to her. It's horrifying. He was entirely willing to drag an innocent, deeply moral woman into a felony without her consent. He was turning her into an unwitting accomplice whose reputation and entire life would have been permanently, completely ruined the second the truth ever came out. So, let's put it all together side by side. On the one hand, we have the romantic myth that the novel really wants us to believe. Rochester as a tragic hero, forced into an impossible situation by a cruel fate. But then we have the legal reality. When you review all the evidence we've laid out in this explainer, Rochester ceases to be a victim of circumstance. He is definitively exposed as a calculating criminal, a bigamist-in-waiting who manipulated an innocent woman to be a pawn in his illegal cover-up. And that brings us to the ultimate question this novel forces us to wrestle with. The whole plot rests on an impossible silence and a massive web of crimes. So, is a crime simply erased just because a fire burns the evidence? We're going to leave you with that provocative thought, because in our next explainer, we will investigate exactly how a very convenient fire burns Thornfield to the ground, kills the inconvenient Bertha, and magically solves all of Edward Rochester's legal problems. See you then.